What if I told you that a single man with no army, no wealth, and no political power managed to create the most loyal following in human history? A following so devoted that they would die rather than abandon him? Most people think it was about faith or miracles. They're wrong. Jesus understood 3 psychological laws that modern science has only recently discovered. Laws so powerful that dictators, CEOs, and cult leaders have tried to replicate them for centuries. But here's what they missed. Jesus didn't just use these laws, he perfected them. And today, I'm going to reveal exactly how he did it. By the end of this video, you'll understand the real reason why his followers became unbreakably loyal. If you're building any kind of following, the most powerful loyalty methods in history were hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years. What I'm about to reveal will change everything you know about influence. Here's what doesn't make sense. Jesus had 12 core followers, 12 ordinary men who left everything to follow someone with no credentials, no wealth, and no army. But here's the kicker. When Jesus was arrested, tortured, and executed as a common criminal, logic says his movement should have died with him. His followers should have scattered, gone back to their fishing boats and tax-collecting booths, and pretended they never knew him. Instead, something impossible happened. These same men who had fled in terror the night of his arrest suddenly became unstoppable. They faced beatings, imprisonment, and execution with a smile. They spread his message across the known world, converting thousands who had never even met Jesus. Most of them died brutal deaths rather than deny him. What could possibly transform cowards into martyrs overnight? Most people say it was the resurrection, but that misses the real psychological miracle. Because even before Jesus died, something extraordinary was happening to his followers. They were already displaying levels of loyalty that defied human nature. Peter, a fisherman, cut off a soldier's ear to defend Jesus. Thomas declared he was ready to die with Jesus. These weren't religious fanatics or desperate people with nothing to lose. They were ordinary men with families, businesses, and everything to live for. Yet they became willing to sacrifice everything for someone they'd known for just 3 years. Traditional explanations focus on the supernatural, but modern psychology reveals something far more interesting. Jesus was unconsciously implementing 3 psychological laws that create unbreakable loyalty. Laws that work regardless of whether you believe in his divinity or not. Laws that every leader, from Caesar to Steve Jobs, has tried to harness. The first law involves something psychologists call costly signaling theory. But Jesus took it to a level that modern science is only beginning to understand. He didn't just ask his followers to believe in him. He asked them to pay a price so high that backing out became psychologically impossible. Here's the psychological secret Jesus discovered. Human beings don't value what comes easy. We value what costs us something. It's called the effort justification effect, and it's one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. When Jesus called his first disciples, he didn't make it convenient. He didn't say, "Hey, follow me when you have time." He said, "Leave everything. Right now, leave your nets, your business, your family. Follow me." And they did it immediately. Why? Because he was triggering their effort justification mechanism. Peter and Andrew left nets full of fish, their livelihood for that day. Matthew left his tax collector's booth with money still on the table. These weren't small sacrifices. They were life-altering commitments made in a single moment. And here's what's brilliant. Once they made that sacrifice, their brains had to justify it. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance reduction. When we make a big sacrifice for something, our minds can't handle the possibility that we made a mistake. So they increase the value of whatever we sacrificed for. The bigger the sacrifice, the more valuable the cause becomes in our minds. But Jesus didn't stop there. He constantly escalated the cost of following him. He told them they might have to leave their families, face persecution, even die for their beliefs. Normal leaders try to make following them easier. Jesus made it harder. And paradoxically, this made his followers more loyal, not less. Modern research proves this works. Studies show that fraternities with harsher initiation rituals create stronger loyalty. Military units that go through intense training together develop unbreakable bonds. Cults that demand extreme sacrifices get the most devoted followers. But Jesus added a psychological twist that even modern cult leaders miss. He didn't just demand sacrifice, he modeled it. He had no home, no possessions, no comfort. His followers weren't just sacrificing for a leader who lived in luxury. They were joining someone who had already given up everything himself. This triggered another psychological law, reciprocity. When someone sacrifices for us, we feel obligated to sacrifice for them. Jesus wasn't asking his followers to do something he wasn't willing to do himself. He was asking them to join him in a shared sacrifice. The result was a psychological bond stronger than family, stronger than self-interest, stronger than fear of death. His followers weren't just believers. They were co-conspirators in a mission that demanded everything from everyone involved. Think of it like joining an elite special forces unit. Nobody joins the Navy SEALs because the training is easy. They join because the training is brutal. The suffering isn't a bug, it's a feature. It separates the committed from the curious. Jesus created the ultimate special forces team of the mind. Every hardship his followers faced didn't weaken their resolve, it strengthened it. Because they had chosen to be there. They had paid the price of admission, and they were surrounded by others who had paid the same price. Here's what's genius about this approach. It creates what psychologists call sunk cost psychology on steroids. Once his followers had invested their entire lives in following Jesus, abandoning him meant admitting that everything they had sacrificed was worthless. Their minds simply couldn't accept that possibility. Modern leaders try to build loyalty by making people happy, comfortable, satisfied. Jesus built loyalty by making people invested. He understood that people don't follow leaders who give them what they want. They follow leaders who give them something worth wanting. This is why his followers could face torture and death with a smile. It wasn't just about believing in Jesus anymore. It was about justifying every sacrifice they had already made. Their loyalty wasn't based on what they hoped to receive in the future. It was based on what they had already given up in the past, but this was just the first psychological law Jesus mastered. The second law is even more powerful, and it explains why his followers didn't just remain loyal to him personally. They became evangelical missionaries, willing to die to spread his message to strangers they'd never met. If this is exploding your mind, stop now and hit subscribe. Why? Because what comes next will blow your understanding of influence, and if you don't subscribe, the algorithm will hide my next secrets from you. Here's the second mystery that baffles historians. Jesus' followers didn't just stay loyal to him personally. They became obsessed with converting others. After his death, they scattered across the Roman Empire, not to hide, but to spread his message. They faced beatings, imprisonment, and execution in cities where they had no friends, no support, no safety net. Why would rational human beings risk everything to convert strangers to a message that got their leader killed? This isn't normal human behavior. Usually, when a movement's leader dies, the movement dies with them, or at best, the surviving followers quietly keep the faith among themselves. But Jesus' followers did the opposite. They became more aggressive, more bold, more willing to take risks after his death than they had been while he was alive. Peter, who had denied knowing Jesus 3 times to save his own skin, later stood before the same authorities who had killed Jesus and boldly proclaimed his message. He was eventually crucified upside down rather than deny his beliefs. Paul, who had never even met Jesus personally, became the movement's most effective missionary. He was beaten, shipwrecked, imprisoned, and finally executed, all to spread the message of someone he had never known personally. What kind of psychological force could drive someone to such extremes for a second-hand belief? The answer lies in the second psychological law Jesus mastered: identity fusion. This is one of the most powerful psychological phenomena known to science, and Jesus created the perfect conditions for it to occur. Identity fusion happens when individual identity becomes inseparable from group identity. When this occurs, people don't just believe in the group's mission, they become the mission. An attack on the group feels like an attack on their personal identity. The group's success becomes more important than their personal survival. Psychologists have studied identity fusion in military units, sports teams, and religious movements. But Jesus created something unprecedented. He fused his followers' identities not just with his movement, but with his personal mission to transform the world. Here's how he did it. He didn't just teach them to follow him. He taught them to become him. He told them, "You are the light of the world. You are the salt of the earth." He gave them his authority to heal, to teach, to represent him. He didn't create followers. He created extensions of himself. The psychological genius of Jesus' approach becomes clear when you understand how identity fusion actually works in the brain. Neuroscientists have discovered that when identity fusion occurs, the part of the brain that processes threats to the group becomes hyperactive. Protecting the group literally feels like protecting yourself. But Jesus went beyond normal identity fusion. He created what psychologists now call transcendent identity fusion, where the fused identity becomes connected to something larger than the group itself. His followers didn't just identify with each other. They identified with a cosmic mission to transform humanity. Here's where it gets psychologically brilliant. Jesus gave his followers a paradoxical identity. He told them they were simultaneously the most important people in history and the least important. They were chosen to change the world, but they must become servants of all. They were destined for greatness, but they must embrace humility. This paradox created an incredibly powerful psychological state. His followers felt simultaneously special and selfless, chosen and humble, powerful and submissive. This combination is psychologically addictive. It gives people significance without ego, purpose without pride, power without corruption. Modern research shows that people with this type of paradoxical identity are virtually immune to persuasion from outside groups. They can't be bought, threatened, or reasoned out of their beliefs because their identity depends on maintaining those beliefs. Jesus had essentially created a psychological fortress around his followers' minds. But the real masterstroke was how he connected their personal identity to his mission. He didn't just tell them to spread his message. He made spreading his message part of who they were. When Peter preached to thousands on Pentecost, he wasn't representing Jesus. He was being Jesus to those people. This explains why persecution only strengthened his followers' resolve. Every beating, every imprisonment, every threat didn't feel like an attack on their beliefs. It felt like an attack on their identity. And humans will die before they'll let their core identity be destroyed. Jesus also used what psychologists call group distinctiveness to strengthen this fusion. He constantly emphasized how different his followers were from everyone else. They were light in darkness, salt in a tasteless world, sheep among wolves. This us versus them mentality made the group identity even stronger. The result was unprecedented in human history. A group of people whose loyalty transcended death, whose mission became more important than their survival, whose identity was so fused with their cause that stopping them required killing them. And even that didn't work. Imagine you're not just a fan of your favorite sports team, you are the team. When they win, you don't just feel happy. You feel like you've personally achieved victory. When they lose, you don't just feel disappointed. You feel like you've personally failed. When someone insults the team, they're not just criticizing your preferences. They're attacking your identity. Now multiply that feeling by 1,000 and connect it to the most important mission imaginable, saving humanity itself. That's what Jesus created in his followers. They weren't just supporting his cause. They had become living embodiments of his cause. This is why his followers could face death with joy. They weren't dying for someone else's dream. They were dying to protect their own identity. Backing down wasn't just cowardice, it was psychological suicide. Their minds literally couldn't conceive of abandoning the mission because the mission had become who they were. Think about modern examples. Why do Marines say, "Once a Marine, always a Marine"? Why do alumni donate to universities decades after graduation? Why do Apple employees speak about their company like it's a religion? Identity fusion. But none of these modern examples come close to what Jesus achieved. He created followers who didn't just work for the mission in their spare time, they became the mission full-time. Every conversation was an opportunity to spread his message. Every relationship was a chance to convert someone. Every hardship was proof of their commitment. Modern leaders try to motivate people with external rewards, money, recognition, advancement. Jesus motivated people with internal transformation. He changed not just what his followers did, but who they were. And once someone's identity is changed, their behavior follows automatically. But Jesus had one more psychological weapon that made his followers not just loyal and evangelical, but literally unstoppable. This third law is the most powerful of all, and it explains why his movement conquered the Roman Empire within 3 centuries. If you're watching this far, you are different from most people. Prove it. Hit like now and subscribe, because people like you deserve to know all the secrets I'll reveal in upcoming videos. Here's the ultimate mystery that historians still can't fully explain. How did a movement that started with 12 uneducated men in a remote corner of the Roman Empire end up conquering the most powerful civilization in human history? How did the religion of a crucified criminal become the official faith of the empire that killed him? The numbers are staggering. Within 300 years, Christianity went from a handful of followers to roughly 10% of the Roman Empire's population, somewhere between 5 to 7 million people. This happened without armies, without political power, without wealth, and despite 3 centuries of intermittent persecution. Compare this to any other religious or political movement in history, and it's unprecedented. Buddhism took 500 years to spread across India. Islam required military conquest to spread rapidly. Communism needed state power to expand. But Christianity spread through the Roman Empire faster than any ideology before or since, powered only by the voluntary efforts of ordinary believers. What's even more remarkable is who was converting. These weren't desperate peasants with nothing to lose. Archaeological evidence shows that Christianity was particularly attractive to middle-class urban populations. Merchants, artisans, educated women, even some members of the Roman elite. These were people with comfortable lives who voluntarily chose a more difficult path. Why would successful, educated people abandon the traditional gods that had served Rome well for centuries to follow the teachings of an executed Jewish preacher? The answer reveals the third and most powerful psychological law Jesus mastered. He created what modern psychologists call anti-fragile communities. Most groups become weaker under stress. They fragment, lose members, compromise their principles to survive. Jesus created something different, communities that actually became stronger under persecution. Every attempt to destroy them made them more attractive, more unified, more committed. This defies everything we know about human psychology. People are supposed to avoid danger, seek comfort, take the path of least resistance. But Jesus' followers did the opposite. The more dangerous it became to be a Christian, the more people wanted to become Christians. The more the authorities tried to suppress the movement, the faster it grew. Here's the psychological secret behind Christianity's impossible growth. Jesus didn't just create a religion, he created a psychological immune system that made his movement anti-fragile. Every attack made it stronger. The key was something psychologists now call stress inoculation. Just like vaccines expose you to a weakened version of a disease to build immunity, Jesus exposed his followers to manageable levels of persecution to build psychological resilience. He warned them they would face rejection, hatred, and violence. He prepared them for suffering instead of promising them comfort. This preparation created a paradoxical psychological effect. When persecution came, his followers weren't surprised or demoralized. They were validated. Every beating proved Jesus had told them the truth. Every imprisonment confirmed they were on the right path. Every threat made them feel more chosen, not less. But the real genius was how Jesus reframed persecution from a negative into a positive. He didn't just tell his followers to endure suffering, he told them to celebrate it. "Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you," he said. Persecution wasn't a sign they were wrong. It was proof they were right. This created what psychologists call cognitive reappraisal, the ability to reinterpret negative experiences as positive ones. His followers developed in psychological aikido. They turned their enemies' attacks into fuel for their own growth. Meanwhile, outsiders watching Christians respond to persecution with joy and forgiveness were psychologically intrigued. Humans are naturally curious about people who behave in unexpected ways. When people saw Christians forgiving their torturers, caring for plague victims, and facing death with peace. They wanted to understand what made such behavior possible. Jesus also built social proof amplification into his movement. He told his followers their light should shine before others so people could see their good works. Every act of Christian love became a recruitment tool. Every demonstration of Christian courage became an advertisement for the faith. The movement became psychologically contagious. In a world where most people lived for themselves, Christians lived for others. In a society built on hierarchy and domination, Christians practiced equality and service. In an empire where might made right, Christians chose love over power. This created massive cognitive dissonance in observers. They couldn't explain Christian behavior using their existing worldview. The only way to resolve this dissonance was either to reject what they were seeing, which became harder as Christian communities grew, or to adopt the Christian worldview themselves. Think of Christianity like a psychological virus designed to spread through acts of kindness rather than through force. Traditional religions and political movements spread through conquest. They took territory and forced compliance. Christianity spread through conversion. It changed minds by changing hearts. Here's the perfect analogy. Imagine a computer virus that actually improved the computers it infected. Instead of stealing data or slowing performance, it made computers run faster, more efficiently, and more securely. How long before everyone would want to be infected? That's what Christianity did psychologically. It didn't just promise future rewards, it delivered immediate psychological benefits. Christians reported greater peace, stronger community bonds, deeper purpose, and genuine joy even in the midst of suffering. These weren't just claims, they were observable realities that outsiders could witness. Jesus had created a self-replicating psychological system. Every Christian who lived out his teachings became a walking advertisement for the faith. Every community that practiced his principles became a beacon attracting others who wanted what they had. The three laws worked together in perfect harmony. Costly signaling ensured only serious people joined. Identity fusion made leaving psychologically impossible, and anti-fragile communities turned every attack into an opportunity for growth. Modern movements still try to replicate this formula, but they miss the crucial element: authenticity. Jesus didn't manipulate these psychological laws for personal gain. He embodied them completely. He paid the ultimate price, fused his identity totally with his mission, and turned his execution into the greatest victory in human history. The result was a movement that couldn't be stopped because it was powered by forces deeper than politics, stronger than armies, and more enduring than empires. Jesus had discovered how to create unbreakable loyalty not through fear or manipulation, but through transformation. His followers weren't just loyal, they were liberated. They hadn't been conquered by his movement, they had been completed by it. These three psychological laws, costly signaling, identity fusion, and anti-fragile communities, created the most powerful movement in human history. Jesus didn't just build a religion, he built a psychological framework that transforms ordinary people into extraordinary followers. Understanding these laws changes everything about leadership, influence, and human loyalty. The man from Nazareth understood the human mind better than most modern psychologists. His methods remain unmatched because they weren't techniques, they were truths about human nature itself. That's why his movement survived crucifixion, persecution, and empire after empire. You've just witnessed the greatest masterclass in human psychology ever taught. If these secrets exploded your mind, you need to see my next videos, but only if you hit that bell. Otherwise, you'll miss the most powerful secrets in history. What's your opinion on these ideas? Leave it in the comments. Send this to that friend with sharp perception. This analysis is speculative and based on publicly available historical information and psychological research, not clinical diagnosis.